My brother called on a Tuesday morning, which should have been my first clue that something was wrong. He never called on Tuesdays. He barely called at all. Dad's gone. His voice was flat, like he was reading off a grocery list. Hart gave out overnight. I've already spoken with the attorneys. The farm transfers to me under the estate plan he updated last fall. I wanted you to hear it from me before the paperwork started moving. He paused, like he was waiting for me to cry or argue or beg. I didn't do any of those things. I smiled, because my father was sitting 6 feet away from me at the kitchen table, eating scrambled eggs and complaining about the weather forecast. Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Lou Garfield. I'm 64 years old. I spent 30 years as a high school shop teacher in Harlan County, Kentucky. Retired early to help my father after my mother passed, and I've been living 10 minutes down the road from the home I grew up in ever since. Some people would call that a small life. I call it the right one. My father, Earl Garfield, turned 87 last March. We celebrated with a chocolate cake from the bakery on Merchant Street and a University of Kentucky game on the television. He ate 2 pieces of cake and complained that the Wildcats were wasting their point guard. He was sharp as a tack, still drove himself to the hardware store on Wednesdays, still kept a garden in the back corner of the property, though he'd let me take over the heavier digging a few years back. The farm itself, 83 acres of rolling pasture and woodlot outside of Harlan, had been in our family since my grandfather purchased it in 1951. It wasn't a working farm anymore, not really. We leased the pasture land to a neighbor who ran cattle, and the old equipment barn had been converted into a workshop. But the property was home, the house where my father was born, where I was born, where my mother hung laundry on the same clothesline for 50 years. That kind of place doesn't have a market value, not a real one. My brother Theodore to everyone except the people who'd known him before he decided to rebrand himself, had left Harlan at 22 for law school in Cincinnati. He did well for himself. Tax attorney, partner at a mid-sized firm, nice house in a suburb with a homeowners association and a 3-car garage. He came home for Christmas most years, sometimes Thanksgiving. Dad always lit up when he visited, set the good dishes out, cooked the pot roast Mom used to make. He was proud of Theo the same way he was proud of me. He just showed it differently. Bragged about Theo's career to the guys at the VFW, bragged about my garden to the ladies at church. I never thought about the farm in terms of inheritance. Honestly, I didn't. It was Dad's land. He'd earned it. Whatever he wanted to do with it was his business. Until that Tuesday morning. I set my coffee mug down on the counter and looked at my father. He had a piece of toast halfway to his mouth. He was wearing the flannel shirt I'd given him 2 Christmases ago, and the reading glasses he kept losing and then finding in the refrigerator. That was Theo, I said. What do you want? He says you died last night. Dad put the toast down. He looked at me the way he'd looked at me when I was 16 and told him I'd back the truck into the fence post. Not angry, just deeply, specifically tired. Does he now? He said. I set the phone face up on the table between us. He says the farm transfers to him under an estate plan you updated last fall. My father hadn't said a word to me about updating any estate plan. That was a cold feeling right there. Not grief, not confusion, something harder and quieter than both of those. I need to make a call, I said. I went to the back porch. The October air was sharp, the kind that smells like wood smoke and cut hay. I pulled up the number for Harlan County Medical Center and asked about any admission for Earl Garfield in the last 24 hours. The woman on the other end checked twice. Nothing. I called Whitmore Funeral Home over on Route 19. They'd handled my mother's arrangements 8 years before. The same family still ran it. The man who answered knew my father by name. Earl Garfield? He sounded genuinely puzzled. No, sir. We haven't had any contact about Earl. Is everything all right? I thanked him and hung up. I stood on that porch for a long moment, listening to the wind move through the old maple at the corner of the house. The same maple my brother and I had climbed as kids. I thought about calling Theo back, asking him directly what he was doing, demanding an explanation. But something my father had once said to me stopped me. He said it after a neighbor tried to cheat him on a hay baling contract back in 1998. He said, "Don't show your hand until you know theirs." I went back inside. Dad was still at the table, but he pushed his plate aside. He was looking out the window at the back field, the way he did when something was working through him. "Tell me exactly what Theo said," he told me. I did, word for word. When I finished, he was quiet for almost a full minute. "3 weeks ago," he said, "your brother called me. Asked if I'd thought about the estate lately. Said he'd been reviewing his own affairs and thought I should have everything in order. I told him I had a will, had it done proper with Vic Sanderson down at the courthouse, and everything was going to be split equal between the two of you. 50-50. Land, savings, everything." Vic Sanderson had been the Garfield family attorney for 25 years. Retired now, but his daughter had taken over the practice. "How'd Theo take that?" I asked. "Didn't like it much. Said something about how he'd invested more in himself, sacrificed more, traveled farther. Said you just stayed behind and lived off the county salary and had no real expenses." Dad's jaw tightened. I told him that wasn't how I saw it, that you'd been here every week for 8 years since your mother passed, and that had value I wasn't going to put a dollar amount on. He hung up. I hadn't known any of this. Dad hadn't told me. I understood why. He didn't want to put me in the middle of something that wasn't settled yet. That was him. He handled his own problems quietly and only asked for help when he'd already thought it through. "If he's calling to tell you I'm dead," Dad said slowly, "and claiming there's a new estate plan, then either he forged documents or he found someone to help him forge them." He paused. "Or he's planning to make the claim real." We sat with that for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a crow called from the tree line. "I know someone we should talk to," I said. Adele Sanderson had her father's instincts and her mother's patience. She was 41, had gone to law school at UK the same year I was finishing my last decade of teaching, and she'd known our family longer than she'd known most of hers. I reached her by 9:30. By 11, we were in her office, above the insurance agency on Main Street. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, making notes on a yellow legal pad in the kind of handwriting that only lawyers and doctors still practice. When I finished, she set her pen down and leaned back. "Okay," she said. "First thing, Frank, Earl, your father's actual will is in my files, witnessed and recorded with the county. Whatever Theo is claiming exists, it doesn't supersede what's on record unless it was executed properly, witnessed, notarized, and filed. So if he's forged something, it'll show when it gets tested." "When will that be?" I asked. "The moment he tries to file a probate claim, which he can't do unless Earl is actually deceased." She looked at my father. "You're not planning on cooperating with that part of his plan, I hope." Dad smiled for the first time all morning. "Not particularly." "Here's my concern," Adele continued. "Your brother is a tax attorney. He understands estate law. If he's moving forward with this knowing you're alive, there are a limited number of explanations. 1, he's delusional, which I doubt. 2, he thinks you won't push back, which he may have miscalculated. 3, she paused, he's planning to ensure the story becomes true." Nobody said anything. "I want to contact someone," she said. "Sheriff's deputy I know handles financial crimes and elder abuse cases. I'd like to bring her in quietly, explain the situation, and let her advise on next steps. Is that all right with both of you?" Dad nodded like it was a routine question. That afternoon, Deputy Shay Carroll came to Adele's office. She was mid-40s. Had a quiet way of talking that made you feel like she was genuinely listening instead of just waiting to respond. She recorded my father's statement, listened to the voicemail I'd saved from Theo, and asked clear, specific questions without drama. "Mr. Garfield," she said, "I have to be honest with you about what I think is happening. Your son may be testing whether you'll simply let this go, file a fraudulent claim, see if it holds, or he may be planning something more serious. We've seen both. I'd like to set up some protective measures either way." "What kind?" I asked. "Freeze your father's accounts from any external modification without his in-person authorization. Alert the county recorder's office that no property transfer should be processed for Earl Garfield without direct confirmation from Earl and his attorney, and place a flag on the estate file with the courthouse." She turned to my father. "I'd also strongly recommend that you not be home alone for the next week or two. Is that possible?" "He can stay with me," I said immediately. I've got the room. Theo doesn't have my new address. I moved 4 years ago, a couple miles down toward the ridge. Dad looked like he was about to argue, then didn't. Just for a few days, he said. And one more thing, Deputy Carroll said. We need to let this play out far enough to build a case. Right now, your brother hasn't technically committed a crime we can prove yet. The call to you could be explained as a misunderstanding, as grief over an anticipated loss, as any number of things a defense attorney would argue. We need him to act. You're saying use me as bait, Dad said. I'm saying let him believe his plan is working long enough to show us what the plan actually is. Dad looked at me. I looked at him. He had the same expression he'd had when he decided to let the deer that kept eating his garden just have the tomatoes. Resigned, but practical. Fine, he said, but I want to be the one who answers when he calls. We moved Dad to my place that evening. He brought his mystery novels, his blood pressure medication, which Adele had already documented with the pharmacist, chain of custody intact, and the framed photograph of my mother that usually sat on the mantel. He set it on the nightstand in my spare room without comment. I didn't sleep well those first 2 nights, kept running the same questions through my head. When had Theo become this person? Had he always been this way under the surface, or had something changed? The money, the firm, some comparison he'd made between his life and Dad's land that had curdled into resentment? I remembered him teaching me to throw a spiral in the backfield. Remembered him driving 4 hours to sit with Dad in the hospital when Dad had his knee replaced 6 years back. People don't just become someone different overnight. The seeds of it must have been there a long time. I just hadn't been looking. On the third day, Theo called. Not me, Dad. I watched from the kitchen doorway. Dad sat in the armchair by my front window, Deputy Carroll's recording equipment running on the side table. He answered on the third ring, calm as weather. Hello, Theo. There was a long pause. I could hear the silence from where I stood. Dad. Theo's voice was careful. I've been trying to reach you. I heard you weren't feeling well. Who told you that? Lou? Lou mentioned you'd had some chest pains. I was worried. I hadn't said a single word to Theo since his Tuesday morning call. I looked at Deputy Carroll, who was making a note on her pad. I feel fine, Dad said. A little stiff in the mornings. Nothing unusual. Another pause. I'd like to come see you. It's been a while. I thought maybe this weekend. I could drive down Friday. We could have dinner. I'm not at the house right now, Dad said. Staying with Lou for a few days. You know how he worries. Right. Theo's voice shifted, almost imperceptibly. Where's Lou living these days? Didn't he move? Dad looked at me. I shook my head once. Can't quite remember the road name, Dad said easily. You know I'm no good with directions. I'll have him call you with it. That's all right, Theo said, a little too quickly. I'll figure it out. I'll see you this weekend, Dad. He hung up. Deputy Carroll looked up from her notes. He's coming, she said, and he asked for the address. He wants to find him, I said. Yes, we'll have plain clothes units on the property by Thursday. Your father's house on Ridge Fork, not here. Theo doesn't know where here is. We'll set up cameras inside and out, and we'll monitor his father's prescription bottles. She paused. If he tampers with anything in that house, we'll know. Friday came and went with no sign of Theo. Saturday morning, I was in my garage replacing a brake line when Deputy Carroll called. Your brother's at the house, she said. He's been inside for about 20 minutes. You should come. I drove the back roads fast, hands steady on the wheel. When I pulled onto Ridge Fork, I didn't see any unmarked cars, which meant Carroll's people were good at their jobs. Theo's rental, silver Camry with Ohio plates, was in the driveway. I parked behind it and walked up to the porch. The door wasn't locked. It never was. Theo was in the kitchen. He was wearing a fleece vest and khakis, the kind of outfit that said weekend casual, but still managed to look like a meeting. He had Dad's pill organizer open on the counter in front of him. There was a small prescription bottle next to it, not one I recognized, and a coffee mug he'd apparently made himself, which told me he'd been there long enough to get comfortable. He looked up when I came in. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't me. Lou. He recovered fast. I tried to reach you. Dad said you'd be here. Dad said that? I just talked to him this morning. He said to meet him here. He gestured vaguely. He must be running late. I walked over to the counter, looked at the pill organizer, looked at the bottle beside it. What is that? I asked. Just something the doctor prescribed. New medication for his blood pressure. Which doctor? Theo's expression shifted. Not much. Just enough. His cardiologist. I spoke with him last month about Dad's condition. I wanted to make sure his medications were up to date. Dad doesn't have a cardiologist in Cincinnati, Theo. He does now? I set it up. He was still calm, still lawyerly, still occupying the room like he belonged there. Lou, I know things have been tense between us. I know you feel like you've been the one carrying the weight here while I've been away. That's fair. I want to make it right. I kept my voice even, by replacing his medication, by being more involved, by making sure he's properly cared for. He picked up the small bottle. These are his new dosage. Put them down. His eyes went flat. Excuse me? Put the bottle down, Theo. Something changed in his face then. The lawyer's surface cracked just enough. You don't understand what you're doing, he said quietly. Dad is 87 years old. He's not going to live forever, Lou. And when he goes, that land is worth almost $2 million to the right buyer. I have buyers lined up, developers out of Lexington who've been watching this county for 3 years. You could walk away with real money, a fair cut, or you could keep playing the loyal son in a house that's costing you more than it'll ever give you back. There it is, I said. It's not wrong. It's practical. It's what adults do. You called me on a Tuesday morning and told me our father was dead. He was sitting right here eating eggs. His jaw tightened. That was a mistake. I'd been drinking. I got ahead of myself. And the estate documents you referenced? The new will? A draft. Nothing filed. And the bottle in your hand? He looked at it, then at me, then at the kitchen doorway, where Deputy Carroll stepped in with 2 uniformed deputies behind her. Theodore Garfield, she said. I'm Deputy Carroll with the Harlan County Sheriff's Office. I need you to set that bottle on the counter and step away from it. He set it down. He stepped back. He looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for. Not quite rage, not quite despair, something in between that had been there a long time waiting for a moment like this. You set me up, he said. You came to our father's house, I said, with someone else's pills. The deputies moved in. Carol bagged the bottle with gloved hands, while one of her colleagues explained Theo's rights in that particular flat, practiced tone. Theo stood very still. He didn't argue. He didn't speak again until they walked him out the door. What they found in that bottle was a combination of a sedative compound and a drug that, at the dose it was prepared in, would have caused a significant cardiac event in an elderly man with my father's blood pressure history. He hadn't gotten it from any doctor in Cincinnati or anywhere else. The state toxicology lab confirmed it 3 weeks later. The pill organizer had been tampered with, only slightly. Some of Dad's actual medication replaced. Not all of it. Enough to build up in his system. Enough to look natural. Dad was in my kitchen when Carol called to tell me that. He was reading a Tom Clancy novel he'd read twice before. He closed it when I came in and waited. They confirmed it, I said. The bottle was what we thought. He nodded slowly, looked out the window at the backyard, where the maple was already deep into its fall color. I remember the day Theo was born, he said. It was early November. Cold snap came through the night before. Your mother sent me down to the gas station at 2 in the morning for more ice chips. I drove back, and the road was iced over, and I slid halfway off the shoulder by the old rail crossing. He paused. I got back to the hospital, and she looked at me and said, You're going to be a terrible driver, your entire life. He half smiled. She was right. Theo was 8 pounds, 4 ounces, red-faced and furious about being cold. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. I still love him, Dad said. I expect I always will. That doesn't change what he did. No, I said. It doesn't. The trial was set for the following spring. Theo hired a defense attorney from Louisville who argued diminished capacity, financial stress, a family history of anxiety. The judge listened carefully and was not moved. Theo was convicted of attempted elder abuse causing bodily harm. The trace amounts of sedative had indeed shown up in Dad's routine blood work, which his actual doctor ordered every 90 days, along with fraud and criminal tampering. He was sentenced to 12 years, eligible for parole consideration in 8. Adele filed the paperwork to formalize what the court called an unjust enrichment claim against any inheritance rights. Under Kentucky law, a person convicted of intentional harm against a family member can be barred from benefiting from that person's estate. The judge ruled accordingly. The farm stays in the family. Dad went back to his house 3 weeks after Theo's arrest, once the deputies had cleared everything and Adele had changed the locks and the alarm codes. He walked through every room, touching things here and there the way he had when we left the first time. The counter, the mantel, the door frame of the room where he and my mother had slept for 51 years. Then he went out back and checked on his garden. The October frost had come in hard. Most of it was done for the year. Need to pull the dead stalks before the ground freezes, he said, more to himself than to me. I'll come Saturday, I said. I know you will. That winter was quieter than most. Dad and I fell back into the pattern that had kept us both sane for the better part of a decade. Coffee on Tuesday mornings, dinner on Fridays, the occasional Saturday project around the property. We didn't talk about Theo much. There wasn't a lot to say that we hadn't already thought through privately. Grief doesn't always need to be spoken to be real. In February, Dad called Adele in and updated his will. He kept it simple. The farm, the savings, the equipment, everything, all of it to me, with the stipulation that the lease with the neighboring cattle operation be honored through the end of its current term, which had 3 years left on it. When Adele called to tell me it was done, I thanked her and sat in my truck in her parking lot for a few minutes with the engine off. It wasn't the inheritance that got to me. It was the fact that he'd thought it through, made his decision, and taken care of it, the way he always had, quietly, without fanfare, without asking for credit. That spring, Dad replanted the garden. Tomatoes, green beans, a row of sweet corn he admitted he probably wouldn't let get all the way to picking before he ate one. I showed up on the first warm Saturday with my own spade, and we worked for 3 hours without saying much, which was exactly the right amount. At some point in the early afternoon, he straightened up and looked out across the back field toward the fence line, where the cattle grazed, and beyond that, the woodlot that ran to the ridge. You know what your grandfather told me about this land? He said. I did know. He'd told me the story a dozen times, maybe more. Tell me, I said. He told me, the same way he always did, starting with the summer of 1951 and the handshake deal at the Harlan County Courthouse, working through the first hard winter and the fence repair and the year the creek flooded and they lost the lower pasture for a season. He told me about my grandmother's kitchen garden and about the elm that used to stand where the workshop was now, and about the morning he proposed to my mother in the doorway of the house because he was too nervous to think of anywhere better to do it. I leaned on my spade and listened. Every word of it, the same as always, because that's what you do when the stories are good and the person telling them is still here to tell them. I keep thinking about that Tuesday morning, not the phone call itself, but the 30 seconds after it, my brother's voice still in my ear, and my father sitting 6 feet away, completely unaware, scraping the last bit of egg off his plate. That distance between what Theo believed and what was actually true. That gap is where everything fell apart for him. What my brother never understood, what I don't think he was capable of understanding by the time he drove down that Friday, is that the choices you make over years have a weight to them. They accumulate. He made his choices. I made mine. Neither of us was thinking about inheritance when we made them. I wasn't visiting Dad 4 times a week because I expected to be rewarded for it. I was doing it because it was right, because my father was 87 and still got up every morning and tended his garden and deserved to have someone around who genuinely wanted to be there. That's a moral question, not a financial one. And Theo had answered it differently, year after year, until the distance between his life and this land had grown so wide that he could only see the acreage in dollars. There's something I've learned about that kind of thinking. When a person starts measuring everything they do in terms of what they're owed for it, they lose the ability to see clearly. Theo was a smart man, genuinely smart, good instincts, sharp memory, but he pointed all of that intelligence at the wrong problem for so long that it had bent. He wasn't stupid when he walked into that kitchen with the wrong pill bottle. He was calculating. And calculation without a decent foundation underneath it doesn't hold. It collapses on itself. His plan had holes in it that a first-year law student could have spotted, because somewhere underneath the logic, he knew what he was doing was wrong, and that knowledge makes people sloppy. What saved my father wasn't luck. It was a sequence of decisions made by people who hadn't given up on doing things the right way. Adele kept clean records. Deputy Carroll asked the right questions without rushing. I didn't confront Theo the moment I found out. I waited, stayed steady, let the truth do its own work. That kind of patience isn't passive. It's the hardest thing I know how to do. When everything in you wants to pick up the phone and say, I know what you're planning, holding that back. Staying calm, thinking 2 steps ahead instead of 1. That's not something that comes from nowhere. You build it the same way you build anything worth having. Slowly, with a lot of quiet mornings, a lot of practice, not reacting when reaction feels easier. My father spent 60 years building something on this land. Not just the farm, the reputation, the relationships, the kind of presence in a community that means people stand up for you without being asked. That's what Theo was really trying to take. Not just the acreage, the accumulated weight of a life well lived. And it turned out you can't forge that. You can't file it with the county recorder. You can't sell it to developers out of Lexington. I think about what I want to carry forward from all of this. Not the courtroom, not the conviction. Those were necessary, but they aren't the point. The point is that old maple in the corner of the yard, and a garden that needs its dead stalks, pulled before the ground freezes, and a father who will tell me the same story about 1951 until one of us is gone. I intend to listen every single time, not because I have to, because I want to. That's the whole thing right there. That's always been the whole thing.